The Children Who Escaped the Nazis, a story of the Holocaust. During a dark time in history, a daring rescue operation saved the lives of thousands of Jewish people. As you read, how does the kinder transport affect Laura's life? That's going to be one of the questions that's going to be asked later on for you to answer. On a chilly April morning in 1939, a 14-year-old Laura Sulzbacher sat alone in a huge train station in London. All around her, people were talking. Laura didn't know what they were saying. She didn't speak a word of English. Laura clutched her only possessions, a suitcase filled with clothes and photographs, and her accordion, which is a musical instrument she loved to play. She wondered what was going to happen to her. Just a few days earlier, Laura's parents had said they were sending her away. Germany, where Laura lived, had become dangerous for Jewish people like them. Thousands of Jewish parents across Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia were sending their kids, some less than a year old, to Britain to live with strangers. They were all part of a desperate plan to save the lives of thousands of children. As Laura waited in the station that April morning, doubt crept into her mind. She didn't know the family that had volunteered to take her in, not even their names. What sort of people would they be? Would they be kind? Fear washed over her. Why did her parents have to send her away? A storm of hatred. Germany had not always been dangerous for Jewish people. In Fürth, the city where Laura grew up, Jewish and non-Jewish Germans lived and worked side by side. Still, life in Germany in the 1920s was not easy. Germany had recently suffered a crushing defeat in World War I. The German economy had collapsed and many people had lost their jobs. Then, in the early 1930s, a man named Adolf Hitler rose to power. Hitler promised to make Germany strong again. He also gave Germans someone to blame for their problems: the Jewish people. Prejudice against Jewish people, or anti-Semitism, had long existed in Europe. Many regarded Jewish people with different religions, customs, and rituals with confusion and mistrust. Hitler fanned the flames of these century-old suspicions. He gave hateful speeches denouncing the Jewish people, calling them subhuman, and said that they were corrupting all of Europe. They were the pests of the world, he said. These speeches were filled with lies, but many embittered Germans listened with their eager ears. In 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor, which is the head of the German government. His racist beliefs shaped new laws that made life harder and harder for Jewish people. Over the next 5 years, Hitler and his Nazi party stripped German Jews of their rights and ostracized them from the whole society. Jewish people were fired from their jobs. They were forbidden to vote. Friends and neighbors turned cold and cruel. Some shouted insults at Jewish people or threw stones at them. Signs appeared in windows of restaurants and shops that said, "Jews not wanted," Sometimes Jewish people were beaten in the streets. By the time Laura was 12, she could no longer swim in public pools or go to the movies or even walk through public parks just because she was Jewish. Yet many German Jews believed that the terror would soon end. They had coped with prejudice before. Many felt sure that the country would come to its senses, that Hitler would be ousted. This lunatic couldn't possibly last much longer, Laura remembers her parents saying. But that hope was soon shattered. On the night of November the 9th, 1938, in cities and towns across Germany, Austria, and parts of Czechoslovakia, mobs organized by the Nazis unleashed terrible violence. Jewish homes, schools, and synagogues were burned to the ground. Jewish stores were looted and destroyed. This night of violent attacks came to be known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. After that, Laura and her parents accepted the truth. Their country, the only home they'd ever known, was no longer safe for them. They needed to get out. The children. As news of Kristallnacht spread, people around the world were horrified. Yet few countries were willing to open their doors to those trying to escape Hitler. At the time, millions of people in Europe and the U.S. were struggling to find work and feed their families. Many countries, including the U.S., argued that a wave of newcomers from Germany would compete for scarce jobs. But in Britain, a group of Jewish and non-Jewish advocates for the refugees was determined to do something. Refugees are people who are pushed out of their home and they're on the run to save their lives. They couldn't get whole families out, but maybe they could at least save the children. They appealed to the British government to take action. Here is a chance of taking the young generation of a great people. Here is a chance of mitigating to some extent the terrible suffering of their parents and their friends. British Home Secretary Samuel Hoare said in a debate over what should be done. On November 22nd, the British government voted in favor of helping children refugees. In the coming days, a rescue operation would be called the Kinder Transport. Kinder means children in German. It was decided that Jewish children under age 17 could receive special travel documents to come to Britain, where they would be placed in foster homes, boarding houses, or hostels. £50, which is about $1,500 today, had to be set aside for each child to pay for their eventual return to Germany after the crisis ended. The money often came from sponsors or the children's parents. So, on November 25th, British radio aired a call for volunteers. Soon after, more than 500 people had offered their homes to young refugees. Meanwhile, the representatives went to Germany and Austria to set up systems for organizing and transporting the children. In March 1939, Hitler's army invaded Czechoslovakia. Transports for Jewish children were quickly organized there as well. Parents in Nazi-occupied countries now faced a hard decision: send their children to live with strangers to keep them safe from Nazi terror, or keep their families together and try to survive the violence. Saying goodbye. On December 1st, 1938, the first train of the Kinder transport left Germany for England. By early 1939, nearly 300 children were arriving in England every week. On April 14th, 1939, Laura's mom and dad told her that they had arranged a place for her on the Kinder transport. Laura had 4 days to get ready to leave. Laura was allowed 1 suitcase, 1 piece of hand luggage, and 10 marks, which is about $70 today. The Nazis didn't want anything of value to leave Germany. At the train station, Laura's parents said they would see her again. As the train pulled away, Laura stared out the window until her mom and dad disappeared out of sight. A new life. Most children arrived in England with little idea of what lay in store for them. Often they did not even know the names of their foster families. They waited at train stations to be picked up, wearing numbers around their necks so they could be identified. Children who did not have foster families were sent to boarding houses or hostels. When Laura arrived in London, a couple approached her. They introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Scribner. Laura didn't understand much of what they said, but she went with them to their home in the city of Lincoln. The Scribners and people of Lincoln did their best to help Laura. The Scribners gave her a bed to sleep in and food to eat, and they sent her to school to learn English. Their 17-year-old son treated Laura as a sister. At school, the kids invited Laura to play cricket, one of England's most popular sports. Laura didn't know the rules, but the kids made sure she knew when to run. All the same, Laura was homesick. She wasn't used to English food and customs. School was hard. Her classmates didn't speak German, and she struggled to understand the lessons. Above all, Laura worried about her parents. They wrote to her often, and in one letter, her father told her to be strong. To keep your head up high, he wrote. Willing to help. Like many Kinder transport children, Laura felt it was her duty to try to get her loved ones out of Germany. She found guardians in England for 2 friends and a cousin, but getting her mom and dad out was harder. She knew the rule. If she could find jobs for her parents in England, they would be allowed to come. So Laura walked around Lincoln looking for the biggest homes, the ones sure to be owned by rich people. She knocked on doors and put her broken English to work. Do you need a gardener, a cook, she would ask. And finally, she found a family willing to help. They said they would hire Laura's parents and sent an application to the British government. Laura felt sure she would see her parents soon. Then on September 1st, 1939, dreadful news came. Germany had invaded Poland. Britain was joining forces with other countries in Europe to fight Hitler. World War II had begun. Pushing forward, the start of World War II put an end to the Kinder transport in Germany. For Laura and the other children, the dream of seeing their families was crushed. Most communication stopped, though Laura did get bits of news about her parents through a relative in Switzerland. Through the hard years of the war, Laura tried to make the best of life in England. She learned to sew while working in the dress shop the Scribners owned. She also took art classes at night. After all, her parents had wanted her to live and thrive. But the grim realities of war were ever present. German warplanes rained bombs on England. German tanks rolled through Western Europe, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. It seemed that Hitler could not be stopped. When Laura turned 18 in 1943, she joined the British Army. I felt I was saying thank you to England for saving my life. She would later say, Laura was posted to London and given a job as a driver. She made many new friends,